Hello, everyone. It's Marc Sabatella from the Mastering MuseScore School here, and welcome to my music masterclass for today, December 10th, 2020. And I'm going to have to do my usual little sound check and all to make sure everything is hunky-dory. And so give me a moment while I, stall on that one there. Yeah, I've got some ideas of some things I want to show you today and some music to look at. So I'm looking forward to getting started in a moment here. Is hunky-dory. Yep. Okay, good. So first I need to catch up and make sure I don't see any burning questions in the chat. So great. Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here. Remember last week I talked about a little bit about maybe coming up with a process for selecting scores. And there was a discussion that Alan started here about that I responded to. And it's definitely an ongoing discussion. I will say I'm starting to feel like if you have, I'd like to consolidate as much as possible the number of different places that I go looking for scores to comment on. And if you are uploading stuff on musescore.com anyhow, I really like maybe using the group as a way of accessing scores as opposed to comments within the course. So I sort of presented both of those as options, but I'm leaning towards saying, hey, let's use the group. Also, a lot of people, when you're uploading your scores, are forgetting to mark them as public. The default is private, and we won't be able to see them. If you add, though, your private score to the group, we can all see it. I still can't download it, though, unless you make it public. Or I think you would have to send me the secret link. And the advantage of me downloading it is that then I can load it into MuseScore and kind of play around with it some, which is often fun. So, I want to start again, like I did last week, by doing my own little demonstration of something, and then I will get to some scores. And so, what I want to do is I'm going to go to the same example that I was working on last time, which of course I didn't save because I wasn't thinking ahead, but that's okay. As I recall, we were working on Away in a Manger, and I had entered the notes. Did I do it in the key of C? Yes, I think I did. So I'm going to do it in the key of C here. And it was, and bum, bum, boom, bum, 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 boom, bum. I'm singing it so that I can sound out the notes. Remember last time I just sort of did that all by ear with my sound off. This time I have my sound on. So, although actually sounds on, but you guys are hearing it, right? Because I've got my early Christmas present here, the AirPods here connected, so that I'm hearing things through there. What I want to talk about is harmony, because that's one of my favorite things to talk about. And I want to talk about the chords that maybe sort of traditionally go with this melody. Huh. Why? Oh, you know what you're hearing? You're hearing my phone, because my phone is right next to the microphone. Sorry about that. That should go away now. That was my bad. I usually turn on the sound on my phone so I can do my sound, verify that it's coming through, and then I turn it off. I just forgot to turn it off. And that's because with my AirPods in, I could barely hear it. All right. So this is the thing. And also I'll get rid of those couple of beats there so that it's looks like a pickup here. The chords, the basic chords is a C chord, like a one chord, bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, bum, and then a four chord, bum, bum, and then a one chord, and then a five chord, da-da-da-da-dum, and then one. That's kind of our basic harmonization, right? So I want to talk about a little bit about what we can do in making more complex harmonies, but not crazy complex. I'm not talking about like going off in the weeds and just inventing chords out of the blue. I'm talking about doing the things that have been done for centuries, the same sorts of things Bach might have done, the same sorts of things, Beethoven might have done, same sorts of things that Charlie Parker might have done. So there's so many different things that we can talk about with harmony, and I'm not going to go really super deep, but I really want to focus on what is absolutely positively the most important thing that you can do, and that is dealing with secondary dominance. So, yeah, it's so great to see where people are from in posting this. I'm really glad to see that that tradition here of people saying where we all are here. So I'm in Colorado also, for those of you who don't know. So secondary dominance, if you've studied, if you've taken my harmony and chord progressions course, which of course I always need to do, I'm bad at doing commercials, so I'm not going to do a commercial. I just want to make sure that everyone knows I do in fact have a course, harmony and chord progressions, that teaches really a lot of stuff about harmony, and so I'll post that into the chat. I forgot to open my chat on my computer, but I will do so in a moment. Here we go. So secondary dominance, it's not my own concept. Like I said, it's been around for centuries, and it is absolutely positively by far, I mean, not even a close second, the single most important concept that you can learn about chord progressions that will improve your musical language if you don't already know about these things. And so what it is taking a chord that's already in your song and giving it its own 5 chord. So we have a 1 chord, we have a 4 chord, back to 1, and then we have a 5 and back to 1. So again, I'm going to assume that we're familiar with basic ideas of how you can put Roman numerals on on chords. And if not, basic music theory is maybe more to the point of what you might want to check out first. So there's that. So yeah, thanks for the kind words about the course. I've really put a lot of effort into that course, and it really sums up a lot of what I have learned over the last 30 years of music making. So maybe more than that. So these are my chords. I'm in the key of C, but what I want to do is say, what if, I'm trying to reach this F chord. If I want to really feel like I've arrived on that F chord, I want to make that F chord feel a little special. We don't necessarily make every chord feel special in this way, but if we want to feel like we've created some motion into that F chord, we ask ourselves, if I was in the key of F, what would the 5 chord be? And the answer is, in the key of F, the 5 chord is C. Well, I already have a C, but yeah, let's not just deal with triads. When we're dealing with secondary dominants, let's actually make them dominant 7th chords. So I'm going to add a C7 here, leading to that F. I'm also going to change the playback sound from piano to oboe. Well, actually, I think I'll use clarinet today because the melody's going a little low for oboe. And I'm doing this so that the chord symbol and the melody kind of stand out from each other. So let's listen to what that sounds like. Right? So the way that C7 creates this sense of 5 to 1 into the F. It's an incredibly, incredibly powerful thing. So we can do that in lots of ways in lots of places. And you could think about, well, hey, let's do the same thing to the G. Let's give the G its own secondary dominant. Well, the 5 chord in the key of G is a D chord, or D7. But my melody is actually not going to support that. My melody is not going to make me very happy trying to put a D chord in there. If I try to put a D chord here, that F sharp in that chord is going to clash with this C, with the G in the melody. Let's hear that. right? So that, you only hear it for a beat, maybe you get away with it, but I know it's not an improvement to me. And in general, that's going to happen pretty often. What I would say is my decades of experience have taught me is that going directly to the 5 chord like this is seldom going to make me very happy. There's lots of complex reasons why that's the case, but I can cut to the chase here and say, really, if you're going to have 2 measures of a 5 chord, let's not do that. Let's make this be a 2 chord for a measure and then a 5 chord. In other words, taking that 5, expanding it into a 2/5. This is going to produce much better results. For one thing, it gives you interest just within that measure, just within that phrase. So it gives you some more interest, some more chord changes, so it's not just G for 2 measures, but it also gives you a new chord to target here. Because now, instead of asking myself what's the 5 chord in the key of G and realizing that that chord doesn't work well here, now I can ask myself, what's the 5 chord in the key of D minor specifically, and put that in here. The 5 chord in the key of D minor is an A chord, or A7. So I can put an A7 here, and that G is going to fit quite nicely. So now, it goes by pretty quickly, and maybe you don't really want it to be that fast. 3/4 is often tricky to have 2 chords per measure, because you have to ask yourself, well, am I going to put 2 beats of one chord and 1 of the other, or am I going to split the difference and maybe put that on the and of 1? And I can totally do that. But I'm also going to try something else. I'm going to say, maybe I can live without the C. Maybe I can go right to A7 here. Let's see if that works. I'm gonna have to. I want to hear that in more context. So I'm going to hear it from the beginning. So it sounds different than you're expecting. To me, it doesn't sound bad at all, and I would definitely consider that. Of course, I could also consider, as I said, maybe making that C chord last for a beat and a half. I'm going to hit Control-4 to move half a beat. And so my A7 is going to come mid-measure. So the only problem is my melody note is on 3, and it sort of doesn't really line up well. If this were a jazz setting, I would actually probably move the melody note also and make it kind of have this whole jazz waltz feel, but that's not what I'm doing. So I'm not happy with that, but I was happy with the A7 either replacing the C, and I was happy with the A7 just lasting for a beat also. The other thing I could do, though, is say, hey, as long as I'm giving the D minor a 5 chord, maybe I could give it a 2 chord also. And so I could make this E minor 7. That's also going to fit my melody nicely. 2, 5, 1 in D minor. So let's hear what that sounds like in context. Now I'm liking that. So the question is, how did I decide on the D minor? This is the thing that I said I could go into a lot. There's a lot of complex reasons for this, but I can summarize them with one very simple statement that I didn't actually say out loud this session, but I've said out loud many, many, many times before and say in the harmony course, and that is this: anything 5 can do, 2/5 can do better. One of my favorite expressions. I made it up myself, but still. So if you have two measures of just a 5 chord, just that G7, you can do that. You can have 2 measures of just that 5 chord, but if you want to create more interest, taking that 5 chord and expanding it into a 2/5, which is basically exactly what I did here. I also had that A7, and I expanded it into a 2/5. For that matter, I could do the same here. I could expand that C7 into a 2/5. I have a 5 chord here. C7 is the 5 in the key of F. I could say, well, let's make that a 2/5. Let's make it 1 beat of G minor 7, or 2 beats of G minor 7, 1 beat of C7. I don't know that I'll like that any better, but that's the idea. When I have a dominant seventh chord and I'm looking if I have any reason to want to make that more chords. I just want a more motion in my chord progression is, I guess, the way I would describe it. More chords, so that it's not one chord lasting for two measures, but chords changing every measure. Then if you want to do that by taking a 5 chord and just expanding it into a 2/5, that does the trick. So here, let me hear what this sounds like with this little quick 2/5 in there. I don't know that I'm going to like it, but I want to hear it anyhow. It's okay. You At this tempo, that feels like a lot of chord moving, but you also have to factor in the fact that we are just hearing MuseScore's playback of this really naively, right? It's just playing a big block chord. If I turn off the playback of the chord symbols and instead add a staff and maybe create some little arpeggiating thing, I could probably do a better job of this. So I'm just going to put in quarter notes, just do something really. Oh, it's a clarinet still. I didn't want a clarinet, so let me undo that staff and actually add a piano staff, right? So keyboards, piano. I'm just going to add just really simple. So all I've done is add quarter notes here. And I'm doing this to create some sense of rhythm, some sense of motion, but I'm trying to spell out my chord. But more specifically, look at what I'm doing. This is spelling out the C chord, right? C, E, G. And then I'm just trying to make a quarter note line that describes the G minor 7 to C7. So if you remember what I did last time when I talked about harmonizing a melody, I said it would work if you picked a note a sixth below the melody. Well, as it happens, that's exactly what I have here. These notes are a sixth below the melody, but that's not how I picked them. I picked them because I wanted to convey a little bit of the sound of G minor 7, and the G and the F did that. And then this E conveys the sound of the C7. Yes, the C, the root of the chord, is not in my accompaniment, but the root is in the melody. So by putting the third in the accompaniment, I feel like I'm going to like this. This is going to be a really simple accompaniment, right? It's just some quarter notes, single notes, but I actually think it's going to be fairly effective. So let me hear it. Yeah, that totally worked. I could expand on it that much more. In fact, let me just add some, like a whole note here. I'm going to add or not a whole note, but a dotted half note. I'm just going to add a C there. And now I'm going to add a B flat here, because the G minor 7 and the C7, what makes them what they are, what makes them interesting chords here is the B flat that both those chords share. Without the B flat, I don't have any sense that I'm not still in the key of C. Remember, these chords came about because I'm trying to get to F. We do what's called tonicize the F, make the F feel like it's the tonic, make it feel like it's the one chord. So in the key of F, we need B flats, and that's where that C7 came from. That's where the G minor 7 comes from. But I don't have in my accompaniment a B flat yet. So I feel like adding a B flat will give it to me. And then that B flat will very happily move on to an A here. So I feel like this now, just adding that one extra note in the piano right hand, is going to fill out this chord really nicely. Yeah, that actually works. I mean, that's a simple, simple piano accompaniment. And this is probably faster than we normally would actually want to do the song. So would this work for the fourth measure, E? Yeah. So I'm not sure what the this refers to, but I see also that you mentioned the E minor 7 flat 5. I sort of blew off the question of flat 5, but absolutely, if we're trying to tonicize the D minor, I said let's give it a 2 chord and said E minor 7 is the 2 chord in the key of D minor. It is true that normally the 2 chord in a minor key is a half diminished chord. So this should really be more of an E minor 7 flat 5 or E half diminished. That B flat, again, comes from the key of D minor. In point of fact, it actually doesn't matter. E minor 7 is perfectly happy to live because we're in the key of C anyhow, and E minor 7 is in the key of C. Using just a plain E minor 7 instead of E minor 7 flat 5 also works. They both work. So I'm still not totally sure what it is you're asking specifically about here, but if I want to continue this same basic motion here, I noticed that my piano part, I want to keep it above the melody, and so I really don't want this line to continue down to a G, but I can go up to the B flat, 6, and then enter a B flat, and then have that go again, I guess, to my A, and then have my, again, I'm going to look at my bass line and think, all right, I want to get to an E here. And then I know I'm going to want an A here. So I'm kind of filling in roots on the assumption that I'm mostly going to use root position. I can change my mind later. But now I'm looking at, this is kind of a walking bass line. It's something that's a Renaissance-ism as well as a jazz-ism to have a bass part that is essentially quarter notes. And if I'm looking at this F and thinking I want to get to the E, well, I'm only a step away, so I could just hang on that F for 3 beats, or I could do something more interesting. Well, one of the things that I might do is just say, hey, I could go up a step and then back down a step, and then I reach my E. So that's a possibility. Before I commit to that, I want to check my intervals with my melody. G to B flat, that's a third. Hey, I like that. F to A, another third. I like that too. So I'm quite happy with how this line is actually working for me. And again, I didn't go to a G in my piano right hand here, which would have been a fine choice otherwise, only because my melody is going there. And again, hey, I'm missing the B flat, so let's put it in there. And now I need to get from E to A, and what I'm going to do is put G. That's the third of that chord, E to G, and then A. Now, what I could do instead, I'll tell you what I'll do instead. I was focusing on root position, but we don't have to focus on root position. I feel like the third of that A7 chord is a really important note, so why not just get it right there in the bass? And now, this G, I just feel like I can continue my walking motion from E down to that C sharp. And then that comes up to the D. So this feels like this should sound pretty good. So I actually don't like the B flat when I hear it as much as I think I'm going to like a B. So let me find out, because I said, this chord really could be an E minor 7. Somehow the B flat just sounded a little bit out of place to me. I could make it work, but let's try it this way. I like it better with the B. Now, what I don't particularly love, though, is the sound of this right here. I'm missing the F, is what I'm missing. The F that gives this D minor 7 its character. So maybe I go ahead and think about adding more notes here, right? Because I've only given my right hand one note to play. Well, let's give it some more notes. Let's put an E on top of that. Let's put a D on top of this. Let's put a C on top of this. Let's put a D. Okay, so let me talk about why I'm doing this. I'm picking notes a third above that note, and they fill out the chord, right? C, E, G. So I have my whole chord there. B flat and D are two notes in my G minor 7, and G is my root. F, A, C. When I get to the E minor 7, I'm like, okay, I've got my E here, I've got my G here, I've got my B. What I was missing was the D. But I don't want to hold on to that D when I reach the A7. So actually, instead of a whole D there, I think I'm going to have to move this guy into voice 2 so that this continues. Maybe I'll let this one be for 2 beats. Okay, I'm thinking ahead, but now I can talk about what I'm going to do. I want the B for 2 beats because I really like the E minor 7, but I really also like the sound of a flat 9 on that A7. I feel like, because that is also coming, that's helping ease that transition into D minor. If I'm trying to tonicize a D minor chord, then that B flat is what's going to lead me to that A. That B flat is what really sounds like the key of D minor, because D minor has a B flat in it. So this B flat, it ends up being the flat 9 on that chord. This idea, again, is stuff I talk about in the harmony course, but the idea that when you're tonicizing a minor chord, you probably want to use that color tone there, that B flat, and it will add this flat 9 color to your chord there. It's just a good sound. So in fact, let's just hear it this way. Yeah, I like that. So now I can fill in my top note here, and my top note, I'm going to put in 2 beats of D, and that fills out that E minor 7 chord. I am not going to go down to C sharp here because I've already got a C sharp in my bass. So I'll go up to E, which is another missing note. Now notice I say A7, but we're not really hearing the A. This chord is actually, we're not hearing the A7. We are hearing a C sharp diminished chord here, really. C sharp, E, G, and B flat. And that's actually fine too. That's another way of tonicizing this D minor. So, and that came about only because I really didn't have a place for that A. I guess instead of a B flat, I could make it be an A here. I'm going to try that both ways also. So that's fine. I like the sound of that A there. I didn't like, though, that it ended up going to the same note. It just repeated that same note. A, sorry. So let me try it with the B flat. So I like that better personally. It didn't bother me not to hear a root on this chord because, again, it just turned it into a diminished chord. So I realize that if you're not accustomed to this kind of thinking, I'm going really fast. If you are accustomed to this kind of thinking, you're probably several steps ahead of me. So I'm just trying to split the difference and say out loud everything that I'm thinking, but not necessarily explain everything in super duper detail. Because again, if you want to learn more about the concepts, I slow down and talk about it in much that you go down to C sharp because I've already got a C sharp in the chord, but also by going up to E, that gets me up the F here. And that's where I wanted to be because I knew that D minor 7 chord was missing an F. And so that makes me happy. And then I can continue my line. Oops. Um, 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 I'm allowing my bass line to actually cross above my melody. That's, oh, shoot. My picture disappeared, right? I can see that. So that's happened before, but at least I know how to fix it. Okay. Am I back? So that's another reason. Okay. So hopefully now you're seeing things correctly. Let me, yeah. Okay, so yeah, every once in a while there's like this little internet glitch apparently that makes that happen. That's the best thing I can do. So I think I should be good now. You can hear me. Can you hear the music? Let's hear this whole thing. So yeah, I just filled in this with kind of a line because again, I'm thinking about stepwise lines. I'm trying to get from D to G, and I know I can get from D to G in 3 steps by going up. But on the other hand, that makes this line go awfully high, so I might rather go down. But to get from D down to G, I'm going to have to skip a little bit, but that's okay. I think I would rather do that. Maybe here I can go up, but I kind of want to have that G lower. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to try stepping down to get to there. And I'm going to do it by kind of arpeggiating that D minor 7 chord. So I'll go down to a C and then A. So that could possibly work. So yeah, I would want to fill in and figure out what the rest of that chord looks like there. So I'm looking at what I have and what I don't have. All I've got are 2 G's here, so I kind of want my 3rd of my chord, and I want my 7th of my chord, and luckily that connects nice and smoothly to where I just was. And then I want my root here and my 3rd there. So I kind of feel like this might work. There's a couple things that I don't totally love about it. One is that this interval is a 7th, and that's not a problem, but it kind of makes me say, hey, look, if I went down to an F, no, I'm not going to like that any better. Yeah, I think I'm just going to live with the A. I could play with this a lot, but yeah, I'm not going to. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to move this A here to voice 2 and shorten it and come up to a C here, because I feel like maybe hearing the 7th of that chord will make me happy. Maybe not, because I'm not really hearing the root anymore, and this combination here actually sounds more like an A minor 7 chord, A, C, missing the E, and then G, but it's worth a shot. Yeah, I think if I don't overthink it, I like it just fine. Now, I could also question this doubled leading tone here. I don't love that either. So I think what I'm going to do is, instead of walking here, I'm going to arpeggiate. And now I have a full G chord here, right? G, B, and F. There's D is missing, I guess. But the melody is about to take the D, but now I move the bass to a B. So I hear the 3rd and the 5th at the same time. And then when the melody goes down to the 3rd, my bass goes up to the 5th. So again, I'm hearing the 3rd and the 5th at the same time. I think I'm going to like that better. Yeah, I think I like that. So I went through all that demonstration because this, to me, this is the level of detail that I like to think about when I'm creating music. It's not just slap down a triad, and make them all diatonic. I want to have non-diatonic chords for interest, and that's mostly about these secondary dominants, this C7 going into F, A7 going into D minor. But it's also about expanding some of these 5 chords into 2 5s, expanding that secondary 5 chord into a 2-5. This, to me, is a super powerful way to add interest to your music. And again, when I first did it, it sounded weird because it was just these big block chords. But now it sounds a whole lot smoother because we're not hearing this really naive MuseScore playback of the chord symbols. We're hearing a somewhat better considered version of things. You might say, well, do I really want that walking bass line? Would I rather have some sort of Alberti bass, boo-doo-doo-doo, kind of figure? Maybe so. Your piece, you do your own thing with it. The point is, thinking about these details is important and useful. And it really does create better music when you think about these level of details. So I mention this again because it's this season where we're thinking about this kind of music, and I've been thinking about putting together little arrangements like this, and have been doing some. Um, and so I would love to see you all doing some of this also, creating some arrangements like this. But it also speaks to an issue that I want to talk about as I start looking at some of the submissions of that I've accumulated here that you people have submitted. Um, MuseScore makes it really easy to compose for really large ensembles. And a lot of people then, say, oh, wow, I can write for an orchestra. I'm going to write for an orchestra. And that's great. It's wonderful that it allows you to do that. However, it can quickly become overwhelming to try to write for a whole orchestra or any sort of large ensemble. Really, dealing with just writing for piano or piano and voice, even though I'm using a clarinet sound and it's labeled piano, it's really, for all practical purposes, we're really talking about a voice. So that's because this is eventually going to be sung. So this type of writing where you're really dealing with just four voices here. Four voices, one physical voice, like one actual person singing, or in this case, playing a MIDI clarinet, but then a piano part that's really just three notes at a time, one note in the left hand, two in the right. So there's a total of four notes that we're dealing with. This is the same concept that shows up when writing for a choir, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, dealing with four notes, or writing for a string quartet or a brass quartet. There's a lot of tradition of writing for dealing with basically four notes at a time. Solo piano music is very often basically four notes at a time, maybe two in the right hand, two in the left. And yeah, maybe you expand it to 5 or 6 notes, but the point is you're not dealing with 23 notes like you're writing for an orchestra. I just made that number up. It depends on the size of your orchestra. Writing and really controlling the details at this micro level where you're really just looking at a couple of staves and thinking through what notes do I have in the chord, how am I doubling things, like I didn't want 2 C sharps on this chord, realizing that I'm missing the root of this chord, but that's okay because it turns it into a diminished chord. These level of detail this level of detail is important to think about, and the way you get good at thinking about it is by composing small like this, just solo piano or piano and voice or 4 voices, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, or brass or string quartet. By focusing on this sort of smaller context and getting good at the details, that's how you become prepared to do a good job of writing for larger ensembles. So, am I thinking pianistic during this? So, no, not really. Although I would like to think that everything I wrote here is playable on piano. It's quite simplistic, right? I mean, this is, as a piano part, this, if I were to accompany this song, I would make this accompaniment much more complex. I would add more notes, I'd arpeggiate things, I'd do stuff. But I would still be starting with something very similar to this as my starting point. So it's still helpful to think through your voice leading decisions. Like maybe instead of just C together like that, maybe I go C, oops. Maybe I do that. I don't know. Let's see what that sounds like. No, I didn't particularly like it, but the point is, whether I'm playing just a simple block chord like that in my left hand, in my right hand, or whether I'm doing something more pianistic, more complex, more making better use of my fingers, I still need to solve the same voice leading considerations. I still need to make sure this C connects smoothly to that B flat, this E connects smoothly to that D. So even if I'm breaking it up with arpeggios and other fancy things, I still want to connect chords smoothly. I still want to pay attention to whether I've got all my chord tones represented, what I'm doubling. I still want to pay attention to all those things. So I would love to see people composing pieces at this level, whether it's piano and voice or just a choir piece or a brass quartet or whatever. where we can really be thinking about these details, and including these harmonic details of how I chose those chords. So it wasn't just triad 1, triad 4, triad 1, triad 5, triad 1 that I started with, but now I have all these seventh chords and lots of lovely circle of fifths stuff happen, because that's what happens when you create 2, 5, 1. In the key of F, 2, 5, 1, those notes follow the circle of fifths, G to C to F, as does E to A to D, and then D to G to C. This is all following the circle of fifths, and that's what you should expect. That's been around again since the time of Bach or before, that we expect a lot of the harmonic motion to essentially go around the circle of fifths. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to checking out your piece, Renato. If you have uploaded it to MuseScore.com and add it to the Music Masterclass group, I can take a look at it. So I talked about this, like thinking about focusing on small details and then using that to prepare you to be able to write big. Last week I showed you a big piece, right? It was a quite big piece that was in the Music Masterclass group for orchestra. And I want to, is this a different arrangement of We Three Kings? Great, because it was a one earlier also. So that one just showed up pretty recently, right? 3 hours ago. Yep. All right. So the one that I'm talking about was, I guess it's moved to page 2 now, because we're getting lots of submissions, which is fantastic. I want to talk about this one here. It was Legacy that we checked out. And it's a really big piece, right? It's for an orchestra, and it's at least relatively short, right? It's only 3 minutes long, but it's not repeat 8 bars 5 times, and that's how you get to 3 minutes. It's got a lot of stuff going on. So one of the things to talk about in writing a big piece like this, even though it's a short piece, it's big, is this... just what is your overall form? Like, there's certain melodic fragments that come back, but when they come back differently than they did the first time. So this is the piece we're looking at. I'm going to paste it into the chat so that you all can be sure you're seeing it. So as far as thinking orchestration, no, when I put this together, I was just imagining piano accompaniment, but I wasn't even like married to the idea of piano accompaniment. I'm just thinking voice leading. And again, if I wanted to take this and write it for a string quartet, I pretty much already have. Here's my cello part. Here's my viola part. Here's my second violin part. Here's my first violin part. As long as I don't let those violins go below a G, I'm good, and I'm pretty sure I haven't. So this could already be a string quartet if I wanted it to be. Then I have to ask myself, is this the most interesting way of writing for string quartet? Well, maybe not, but again, I've at least thought through the voice leading considerations, the doubling considerations, the voicing considerations. By thinking through those in this sort of simple, abstract way, then you can think, now how do I make it more pianistic? How do I make it more string quartetic? So I want to now open Legacy in MuseScore because I have saved it. So I come to where I've saved it. It's under Courses, Music Masterclass. Oh, 2020. Legacy. Here we go. So by looking at it in MuseScore, I'll be able to fiddle with it more. Also, I'm going to switch to my presentation workspace, which I set up for myself. The workspace feature in MuseScore is really cool. So I set it up to like get rid of the toolbars, get rid of the inspector and palette. So I just have a nice clean display to show you. So one of the things you might want to be aware of is the timeline. If I go to view timeline, you can get a good big picture of what happens in this score. It's an andante section and then the doloroso section. And if I click there, it should take me directly to that spot. And then a misterioso section. Oh, is that what that is? Oh, no, I clicked the wrong one. Here's misterioso section, right? So by following the tempo markings that are, written out in this case with Italian phrases that describe the feel of it, you get a good sense of the overall form of this piece. And he's also put in rehearsal marks, which are great because now I can go in, and his rehearsal marks are actually measure numbers in a box, which is great. That's a one common way of doing it. I use letters more often, but you definitely see numbers used this way. So this also lets me get a good idea of the form of the piece. Like here, you can see there's like a new thing happening. So just by having gone to this number 29 here, which is also the tempo marking there, I think if we start here, you'll notice there's a change in character of the piece. Right? The character of the piece changed. So I'm assuming that was really loud for you guys because it was really loud for me. But you're not hearing what's in my speakers. You're hearing what's coming through the computer. So hopefully that didn't like blast anyone out. But I can certainly turn down MuseScore's playback if people tell me that that was too loud. So really, this piece is composed in quite a few separate sections. But each section is short and it's only a few measures long. This andante section here gets me from measure 43 to 54. So it's 11 measures long of this. Right? It's just 11 measures of that, but then we come to another section, which is actually, I think, similar melodic material. So this, I can't tell you what he used in his version, but I can tell you that I'm just using the default sound font here. As far as I know, I just have this default installed. Let me check to be sure. So view, synthesizer. Yeah, I'm just using the default sound font. So it's possible the version on MuseScore.com, he might have uploaded it with some different audio. He might say that in his comments somewhere. No, he doesn't say that. So I guess I don't really know if he has used a different sound font in his version, but I can certainly just listen to a little bit. It doesn't sound different from what I'm used to, so I'm assuming that that's really the default sound font. Yeah, I think that's just the default. So I'm gonna go back to where I was. You want to think about the big picture when you're doing this. I think he had a goal of making this a relatively short piece because otherwise these sections easily could have been a lot longer. But it was the andante section here. Yeah, I was looking at this andante section, and there's a melodic phrase that happens here, and the timeline can show you more than it's showing you. It can show you, if I scroll up here, if I drag this up, it also shows you a kind of a map of all the instruments in your score. So actually, I think I'm just going to detach the timeline here. There we go. So I'm making it big enough that I can see them all at once. So this is showing you all the instruments, and you can see where they enter and exit. So you can see here at that andante section here, there's only a few instruments actually playing. Well, where am I? Let's go right there. Huh. Why am I not playing? I think because my space bar is going to the timeline. That's weird. I wouldn't have expected that to happen. Let me close it again. Now bring the timeline back. So these are the only instruments playing are the ones that are highlighted here. The ones that have the dark squares. So these instruments aren't playing until here. You can see that at this spot, all the rest of the instruments come in. And this is really useful to have these different textures and writing for different textures in different places of the piece. So So is Tentacruel here? Yes, you're here. Yay. Hey, Martin. So yeah, so this is still using 3.5. I believe Martin can maybe speak to 3.6. The beta version should be out in the next few days, and I'm looking forward to in MuseScore Cafe, hopefully next week, getting to preview some features, and then we get people to kick the tires some and make sure that we're all in good shape to release the final thing. But it's really looking good, I have to say. So it's really useful to be looking at the details is the point I was making before. And one of the things to do is look at this section here, and boy, there's an awful lot of staves here, but most of them aren't doing anything, right? So if I just look at the strings here, I can just follow. Oh, that's harp. Here's so we have that one staff there that must have been an oboe. And so at this point, I'm probably better off being in a continuous view. Except I used the wrong shortcut. What did I do? I can't remember my shortcut for continuous view because I don't use it often enough. And that's the disadvantage of being in my special presentation mode is I made the continuous view control go away. So I have to switch back to my regular thing and go to continuous view. I thought Control Alt V. No, Control Shift V. Nope. How about Control Shift V? Ah, there it is. Control Shift V. There we go. Now I know what it is. So good. By being in continuous view, I can see my instrument labels over here. I can also get smaller so I can see more stuff at once. So if we just follow the spot where we were, which I have now lost, right? So I want to get my timeline back. I was here at the andante. And if I look at what's happening here in just the strings, you can deal with all those same issues of, you know, what's happening harmonically here, where my doubled notes are, like the bass and the cello have the same note. The bass sounds an octave lower, right? And then whatever the chord is that's happening here, we have a chord that's happening that's based on this is a B in the viola because I can read alto clef with some amount of effort. And then I have an F sharp and a B, right? So I have some chord happening here. Now, this language that he's using isn't about triads at all, right? It's a much more complex language, but we can still talk about what's happening. We have an E down here, we have a B, we have an F sharp, and another B. So it's actually a stack. And I like to compose not directly into this. I compose into something that looks more like this. So I might want to look at that structure by saying, hey, I've got that low E, and then I had above that somewhere a B up there by middle C, and then what else did I have? F sharp. So I had the E, the B, the F sharp, and then another B. So, oops, I keep using the wrong switch. F sharp and B. It's a structure that's based on a fifth, and then a fifth from B to F sharp, and then a repeated note on top. So this is essentially, I would describe it as being basically an E minor sound, but without the actual third of the chord. But I'm perceiving it as minor only because I think the context of the piece convinced me of that. Maybe the next note in the piece actually, I've already forgotten now if the next note of the piece maybe. Yeah, there's a G later on in the measure, and other things about the piece, like the previous measure. Right? It's set up a very clear minor key sound. So that even when he starts here, the oboe, is got that G. So even though at the downbeat of this measure, we're not hearing a G, it's still ringing in our ears, and we're about to reconfirm that G later. This kind of control of the sound is what I talk about when I talk about doubling. Do you want to always give me a full triad, or do you want to use some of these more open types of sounds where you're actually missing the third and you provide it later? If you're going for a sound that's based on conventional harmony, then you don't do this. You put that third in right away most of the time. But if you're creating more of this mysterious sound that's not so based on conventional harmony, if you're not trying to do it the way Bach would have done it, you're not trying to do it the way Mozart would have done it, but you're trying to sound like a more modern score, then these kinds of sounds, these open sounds that are based on fifths and fourths kind of combined in interesting ways that ultimately resolve themselves to still give you a feel of a triad without playing the triad. That's really a big part of the harmonic sound that happens here. And what I'm doing here is I'm just looking at the strings, because this is a spot where essentially only the strings are playing. But when the rest of the orchestra comes in, you could still do the same thing of just look at the strings and make sure the strings are working for you as a section. And then when you eventually bring in, say, the brass comes in, and you again do the same thing. You want to have a full statement of your chord and nicely balanced and all that within the brass. This is a traditional way of writing for orchestra. You make the brass all balanced nicely within themselves. You make the strings all balanced nicely within themselves. It's not the only way of writing for orchestra, but it manages the problem by thinking of it in terms of sections like that when you're writing for the whole orchestra. Then, if you want you can use sounds like maybe you just have one oboe, one horn, and one cello. And now that becomes your section. And now you can still only be thinking about 3 or 4 things, even though they're in different families. The point is to be thinking about 3 or 4 things at a time. So you're looking at the 3 or 4 strings, 3 or 4 brass at a time, maybe 4 or 5, depends on how big your piece is. So by looking at things that way, you can write big but think small. And that's what I would say is kind of the lesson here. So question is, can you play back a single staff? So yes, the currently supported way of doing that is through the mixer, view mixer. And then you can simply pick, and I'm going to have to, because this is a big long score, or a lot of staves. I'm having trouble. There we go. So you can pick which staff you want to hear. Like, oh, you want to hear just the oboes? So let's solo the oboes. And now we'll hear only the oboes. So the mixer is the way to do that. I should say that at one time we had implemented a way where you could just select 3 staves, say, and it would only play those 3 staves. The problem is people were clicking a measure to say, this is where I want to start playback, and it was only playing back that staff. And so that annoyed people to no end, so we had to back out that change. But it's a shame, because we really lost this cool ability to have just a simple way to select which staves you want. That only works if they happen to be adjacent like this, but it was still cool. Someday we'll probably add that back. We just got to figure out how to do it without confusing people to think, who just click a measure and then say, now why is only that measure playing? So, or only that staff playing. So that's my point about thinking. And so that also applies if you want to think small. Solo doesn't literally mean only that one staff necessarily. I can get my mixer back, and I could, if I chose, want to solo all my brass instruments. So I can just focus, not mute, but solo. Solo the horns, solo the trumpets, solo the trombones, solo the tuba. So now, when I play this big passage here, I'll only hear the brass. So that's just the brass that I'm hearing there. So, and that's actually kind of nice because now I can focus really on what's happening in the brass and talk about that. Because what's happening here, again, if I went through and really thought through these voicings, I think we're going to find a lot of the same concepts. We have a B, a B, a B, a D, a B, a B. Hopefully I'm in concert pitch here. Oh, I think I'm not in concert pitch. And again, I disappeared my concert pitch button, so I have to know the shortcut for it, which I don't. So I need to go back to my other, because I don't think I've defined a shortcut for concert pitch. So let me turn on concert pitch because I can't transpose as fast as I can think. So I would rather see all my instruments in concert pitch. So again, I can look at this one chord at a time and really see what's happening. And I think what we'll find out is, again, the notes, whoops, are that was an E and a E. It's essentially an E minor kind of sound that's happening here. When we hit here, there's a C natural that's happening. Now we have a C major chord, right? That was a clear C major chord, but the major seventh coming in here. I wonder about this is because it says concert. I said concert pitch, but I'm seeing different key signatures here, so I'm not sure if I'm interpreting something wrong or what, or if MuseScore is doing something funny here. So in any case, you can easily get overwhelmed looking at a score this big, and I am getting overwhelmed looking at it because it's not my score, right? So if it were my score, though, I would have been writing it little bits at a time and making each little section, making these 2 bars of just woodwinds really be right, be exactly the way I want them to be. In the same way, I took that same level of detail to these 2 bars here. I'm focusing on the details and then assembling them all. And as I'm assembling them, I'm paying attention to that big picture that the timeline gave me of, oh, I've got some places where all the instruments are showing. I don't actually use the timeline that much because I kind of have the timeline in my head for my own scores. But if I'm looking at someone else's score, it's really nice to see when do those brass instruments come in? Where are they resting? So those kinds of details become really important. So if you're going to write big, that's my advice. Think small. Get the details right at a small level. Write sections that just work for just the brass, just the woodwinds, just the strings, and get those details right of voice leading, voicing, and doubling. Get all those things the way you want them to be, and then start thinking about texture. Or maybe not then, maybe you think about texture first, like, oh, I'm going to have just strings here, then I'm going to have strings plus brass here, and I'm going to have brass plus woodwinds over here, or I'm going to have a little mixed thing of oboe plus horn plus cello over there. You can think about that big picture first, then go in and deal with each section one at a time. But when you deal with the sections one at a time, be thinking about those details by focusing in on just that. So that's kind of my overall advice here on things. So so I spent a while doing my demonstration, and then I've spent a while just talking about some of the things that come up in working big. Next time I want to go back and look at some of all the individual pieces that people have submitted, but I wanted to talk more about this piece because it is such a cool piece, but I realized it's hard to talk about big pieces in this setting because I could easily spend hours talking about just this one piece. What I can do is talk about sections of it and talk about what's happening in that section. And so that's kind of what I'm doing a little bit here, is by focusing on just the brass in just these 2 measures, but then also talking about this big picture. Hey, look, the brass rested here, and therefore it was a big deal when the brass came back in, because it went from that quiet string passage to suddenly this big section with all the brass, right? So thinking about the big picture is important also when you're writing for big ensembles. So I encourage you to take scores. If you see a big score that you like, do this, download it, and start getting inside it. Understand what makes it tick. Don't just listen to it and say, oh, I wish I could do that. Say, hey, I can do that, because a big score is nothing but a small score that has more small scores stacked on top of it, right? It's a small violin, it's a small string score with a small brass score on top of it and a small woodwind score on top of that. And then the woodwinds, yeah, it might be a 10-minute long section, but the woodwinds only play here, and then they rest for some measures, and then they play here, and then they rest for some measures, they play there. And within each section, you can still look at it one phrase at a time, get the voicing, voice leading, and doubling the way you want it, and deal with each section using the skills that you developed by writing small to begin with. So if you take a big piece, then start looking at it, break it down into these components, and understand what's going on with it. Then you can start to try to talk about how to emulate that in your own writing. So I guess that's the challenge that I would put out for you, is write small to get to build the skills, and then look at some big scores, see how they're put together, and then see if you can take your small score and assemble it into a bigger score also. And I've seen a couple people try to do that some, and so I might look at that a little bit next time. Okay, so yeah, I've been talking for a while here and covering a lot of different topics, and hopefully people find this interesting. I know I do, so I'm just going to keep doing this. I will encourage people to be uploading your scores to MuseScore.com and adding them to the Music Masterclass group. That is the easiest way to make sure that I can see it, because if it's in the Music Masterclass group, even if it's private, I can see it. But then if I'm going to download it into MuseScore, you actually need to make it public in order for me to be able to download it. So that's what I would recommend you do, is when you upload it, make it public, and then add it to the Music Masterclass group also, to make it easy for me to find, and make it easy for other people to find, so that we can all be looking at the same scores and commenting. So yeah, I'm going to kind of wrap up here, and just continue to challenge you all to be thinking about some of these songs that I've been looking at Christmas songs, because that's the time of the year we're dealing with, and I'm going to keep doing examples and things using some Christmas songs because they're fun to deal with. But also, just be whatever music you're doing, think about these details. Think about writing it in a way in which you can really be in control of details the way I was, and then using that as your stepping stone to writing bigger. So hope you all enjoy, and I'll be back with more next week. So hope to see you all then. Keep uploading stuff. Remember, last week I also showed BandLab, and if you want to start doing some collaborations there, and just creating your own projects there and collaborating with each other, highly recommend it. Contact each other offline. Just use the comment section within the group on MuseScore.com, or within the course, to kind of, or within BandLab for that matter, to just kind of recruit people to make music together. You can have fun doing that as well, and I'm happy to then give my comments on the results that come up. So, all right, I will see you all next time. So thanks a lot for being here. Bye.